Is it possible for a firewall to actually increase the attack surface of your network? A firewall is a device that's supposed to protect your network from hackers, but what if installing a firewall could actually make the situation worse? In this video, we're talking about a scenario where that actually happened. So this bug that we're talking about here is CVE 2026-0300. This article is by Unit 42, a threat intelligence group within Palo Alto Networks, right? Palo Alto Networks is a manufacturer, a developer of a line of security products, one of them being the Palo Alto Firewall. Now, inside of the Palo Alto Firewall, there is software called PAN-OS. PAN-OS is like a Linux distribution, right? Like anything else, but it's proprietary and contains software to keep hackers out of your network. It provides monitoring, firewalling, IDS, IPS, all that good stuff, right? What's interesting though is, like any other piece of software that's written in a language most likely like C, we'll get into why I think that's the case here in a second, those pieces of software can have vulnerabilities in them, and if a hacker figures out about a vulnerability in your firewall, ironically, the firewall itself can be used to pivot into your network. All this popped off because Palo Alto Unit 42 is tracking CLSTA1132. I don't know this convention, but they make it sound like it has to do with one of the typhoons, which I've talked about before. Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon are both APTs being associated by multiple governments to the Chinese government, looking at attacking, I think, mainly infrastructure, like VPN networks, stuff like that within the US and other, I think, like Western countries, right? So they're tracking this threat actor using the firewall itself to get into networks, exploiting a vulnerability in PAN-OS, right? Now, there is not a lot of public data about this vulnerability, but what they highlight here in the Unit 42 is that the actor is covering its track by deleting Nginx crash entries and Nginx crash records, which at first glance is probably like, wait, holy crap, is the threat actor exploiting a vulnerability in Nginx? Nginx, if you're not aware, is one of the most widely used, if not the most widely used, seconded potentially by Apache, HTTP server in the world, right? And maybe if not an HTTP server on its own, definitely a reverse proxy where you put Nginx at the front of your application and behind it you have some other custom application, and it just kind of acts as a load balancer or a middleman to negotiate all of that traffic, right? So this, as a result, because it's so prolific, is one of the most highly audited pieces of software in the world. Lately, it's been hard to stay on top of what's actually happening in the world of cybercrime, and that's why today's video is sponsored by Flare. Flare is a threat exposure management platform that allows you to see into the world of cybercrime so you know how to protect your organization. For a long time, getting actionable threat intelligence tailored to your organization was not only a long process, but it was also extremely expensive. Now, Flare's threat flow can help speed this up. I have friends that do a lot of work in the ICS OT security world, so I actually had Flare spin up just a quick report on what's the current landscape of ICS OT security, right? How are hackers trying to hack into power plants, water processing facilities, all that stuff? And so it actually gave a really good report kind of highlighting, hey, there are a few known threat actors from the intel that they can see that are associated with Iran, probably related because of the Iran war, not to get political, but it's just the nature of the game. Targeting right now US, French, and Japanese energy facilities, which is kind of interesting. Now, obviously, Flare does use AI under the hood to kind of help write this, and you can go right into the data that Flare is seeing to kind of check the math on the report if you have questions. They have the regular reports that they make where they cover all of the major incidents, like recently the copy fail bug, which is being actively exploited and talked about on the dark web right now. Guys, you know the rule. The best way to help the channel out is go check out the sponsor. Go give Flare a shot right now. Free trial available at the link below. See if Flare's new threat flow can help you stay ahead of cyber criminals. Flare, thank you for sponsoring the video. Let's get back to it. Projects like Google's OSS Fuzz, which is an open source repo of fuzzers that Google runs with internally on its compute to find vulnerabilities and fix them in open source software, has been fuzzing Nginx for at minimum 6 years, probably internally prior to 6 years, like before that. And so, as a result, there is low chance that a threat actor is just going to throw a 0 day in Nginx at some arbitrary company or some arbitrary target. Right? They're going to hold on to that vulnerability for a very long time. Here's what I think is actually happening with this potential vulnerability, right? Nginx is this piece of software that distributes, but developers can add modules to Nginx. Let's say, for example, I want to add some custom feature to my distribution of Nginx for my software, like the Palo Alto report specifically calls out, this is a captive portal vulnerability. So something about the way they handle their captive portal software has a bug. It likely occurs in the form of an Nginx module, right? And so, when you use the Nginx API, you get the ability to access the headers on the request, right? Maybe you want to use a special kind of cookie or a special kind of request header and use that to see if the token presented matches session data in the backend, and you use that to authenticate the user on the captive portal, right? Something very simple like that. Now, like any piece of code, right, you are able able to write code that has vulnerabilities that get compiled into Nginx, and at the end of the day, can allow a hacker to get in, right? So in classic memory corruption fashion, we have a header called xVisitorName, and xVisitorName is pulled out of the request, and then I mem copy the header to the stack being a 4096 buffer, but oops, I didn't validate that the length is less than 4096, and as a result, this is a stack-based buffer overflow. Now, obviously, we have a variety of mitigations in place to stop this from being exploitable, like ASLR, stack cookies, control flow integrity, etc. But that being said, right, this is like the normal primitive that could occur in a piece of software like an Nginx module. Now, I'm not saying that is what's happening, but they did highlight it was an overflow, I believe, buffer overflow vulnerability in the captive portal functionality within Palo Alto. So, my guess is going to be that there's some kind of custom module that lives inside of Nginx, or maybe there's a binary on the back end of Nginx, and that has a buffer overflow vulnerability. Highly unlikely that they're throwing around Nginx 0 days. That would be insane. By the way, to kind of like prove this out, to show you guys, I wrote that module there, and I made it so that, that module is installed into a vulnerable version of Nginx. And when I send just 512 A's into the request in that xVisitorName header, no issues, I got a normal response back. But if I do that again, but I do 5,000 A's, obviously more than 4096, I get no response back from the server. And then if I look at the error.log, I might be in the right folder for this, let's see. Error.log, nope. But if I look at the error.log, you'll see that worker process blank exited on signal 11, core dumped, signal 11 being a SIG-SEG-V or a segmentation fault. Now, while I literally do have the core pattern like set up so that I can see the cores, it's not like manifesting inside of my folder. I'm not sure why. You can see via the error log that it is core dumping. So we, kind of proof of concept that you can have an overflow in a custom module in Nginx. Now, obviously, it's scary enough that a firewall, a device meant to protect your network, also gets them into your network. But it's even worse that the firewall is more of like, it's an authoritative piece of your network, right? Like you would think that the firewall is the most sacred, so you tend to put scary credentials in there, right? In one case, or in this case, they're seeing the threat actor not only exploit onto the firewall to do malicious stuff, but then they're using Active Directory enumeration, using the service account credentials on the firewall to target domain DNS zones, and then obviously covering up their trails by cleaning up the fact that they're doing ptrace injection. Ptrace injection, by the way, is a technique where you can use the ptrace functionality of the Linux kernel to inject memory and other stuff and modify registers and all this very, debugging or manipulation, choose your own adventure inside of a process, right? So if you have a running process as a lower privilege level in your root, you can use ptrace to like inject shellcode into that process so it kind of blends in with the rest of the OS. And then obviously they're removing evidence in the log of the fact that they did ptrace injection, so it looks kind of normal. And then obviously, right, they're inside the network via the firewall. They want to figure out how they can get to the rest of the network, right, doing your standard hacker pivot stuff. So they use actually two open source tools, kind of interesting, Earthworm and Reverse SOCKS 5. Again, these are open source networking tools that create a SOCKS proxy to enable the threat actor to move into the rest of the network. Kind of interesting. The conclusion that the guys made was that because of their reliance on open source software, it actually made it like very hard for them to see the threat actor, right? Like typically, if you're looking at a piece of malware, there's going to be like signatures inside of it that show like, hey, this is malware. It's doing this evil stuff. It's also a new thing we haven't seen, but it has like these properties. Whereas the use of open source software makes it very difficult to find it from signature-based detection because it's software that everyone knows about. It's kind of hard to prove that it's evil. Now, this intrusion is happening on a very limited set of targets, right? It seems like there's like a single-digit number of people that are affected by this. So if you're one of them, I guess, watching my channel, first of all, hey. Second of all, just go hit up EDIT42. They have an entire incident response team that is willing to help you reduce the exposure to an attack like this. And yeah, and the question is like, would Rust have fixed this? Technically, sure, Rust can't do buffer overflows, right? It's kind of like a default feature of Rust. But that being said, we don't know a ton about like the structure of the software. And if it truly is like an Nginx module that's exposed through this, then like it's hard to compile in Rust into C. Like you can do it, but it just makes it difficult to define those security boundaries between the FFI of C and Rust, right? It's not like the easiest thing to do. And also, if you're watching this, you may be asking like, oh, is Palo Alto not safe to use? No, I mean, Palo Alto, like any company, is a company that makes software. Software has bugs. This is one of the very few vulnerabilities I've actually seen come out about Palo Alto. We see a lot of Fortinet lately. We see a lot of Avanti bugs. I think literally while I was recording this, another Avanti CVE came out, like a big one being actively exploited. But I don't see a lot about Palo Alto getting popped. So I mean, from a are they good standpoint, I think so. Again, I'm not in the game really of like recommending or not recommending software, but I want to highlight this is not me like shitting on the company. This is more just me like, hey, look, a bug. Maybe you should go deal with it, right? Not Palo Alto, but like people that use it. Anyway, guys, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. If you like this video, if you like hanging out with me, if you think I'm cute, I don't know, hit that sub button. I really appreciate it. And then go check out this other video about a similar bug that you will probably, hopefully enjoy just as much. Click on it. Get in there. All right, see you later. Goodbye.